Hello and thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to be back on Today with Zamtel. I am Kalumba Chikonde. Now in this episode, Patience Chisanga, our field presenter, will take us down memory lane to the 19th century as she takes a look at the British South African company's mining interest in pre-colonial Zambia. I know that you're going to enjoy this story. Let's take a break with a message from Zamtel.
I'm breaking out of my shell, I am leaving the place I knew well for well. You are. I'll tell the world my story. I'll tell the world how I found you. I'll tell the world.
Join the only network that lets you tell it your way. Zamtel it. Zamtel. Live life today.
Thank you, Kalumba, and welcome viewers to another exciting edition of Today with Zamtel on the Road to Independence series. This week, we focus on the history of the British South African Company and its economic interests in present-day Zambia. The British South African Company was established in 1889 by a royal charter at Cecil Rhodes' instigation. The main objective of the British South African Company was to acquire administrative and commercial rights in South Central Africa.
When you talk about the history of the British South Africa Company, its history starts in South Africa. It was one of those companies that was formed in South Africa by John Cecil Rhodes, who was himself interested in mining, interested in exploration, and also finding raw materials. So when it was formed in South Africa, it found itself into competition with other mining companies that were already on the scene, and therefore in an effort to expand its horizon, it began to look to the north. And remember, in South Africa, it is linked to the gold mining as well as the diamond mining. So Cecil Rhodes was hoping that he could find another gold mines in what became Southern Rhodesia, and therefore he moved north. And unfortunately, he did not have the same kind of findings as was the case in South Africa. But instead of giving up, he decided to persevere and move further north, and found himself in what is today Zambia, carrying out explorations. And indeed, there were some findings, but not gold as was expected in South Africa. Initially, it was the zinc mines in what is today Cairo, which was then Broken Hill at the time, and then extending further to what is today the Copper Belt. The BSA company was undertaking administration on behalf. So the BSA company appointed people to manage different areas, and we saw that from the time that the BSA company was put in place, it began to appoint administrators in different places and establishing administrative centers, which later came known to be known as the bombers. We know, for example, when you are in Osaka today, people refer to the place next to where the Zamtel headquarters are as the bomber. That was British Overseas Military Administration.
When the BSA had divided its administration into two parts, the area south of the Zambezi River became known as Southern Rhodesia, while that to the north became Northwestern and Northeastern Rhodesia. The two were joined in 1911 to form Northern Rhodesia. Northwestern Rhodesia was administered by a commissioner at Colonial, while Northeastern Territory was governed from Fort Jameson, now known as Chipata. Colonial was the first administrative center. The brick house, still standing to this day, was the residence of the British South Africa Company Colonial Administrator, Robert Correndon. In 1911, the BSA decided to have one administrative capital of the entire territory of Northern Rhodesia. Livingstone became the capital of Northern Rhodesia in that year. John Cecil Rhodes, the founder of the British South Africa Company, pushed British influence into the region of present-day Zambia as part of the Scramble for Africa by obtaining mineral rights from local chiefs under questionable treaties. His ambition was to extend the British Empire north, linking the Cape of Good Hope and Cairo respectively at the southern and northern tips of Africa. British territories were generally marked in red or pink on a geopolitical map, and this concept was known as the Cape to Cairo Red Line.
Cecil Rhodes was one of those early business people who had been successful in South Africa, and therefore his interest mainly was to expand his business empire. And therefore he came not as a political figure, but as a mining, as an explorer, somebody interested in expanding his business.
Once the British South Africa Company started mining in Africa, the British gradually took it over. John Cecil Rhodes and the BSA Company made treaties between 1891 and 1894. Towards the end of the 19th century, the British South African Company had acquired a vast landlocked country that we now know as Zambia, north of the Zambezi River. According to the Royal Charter that was signed by the British government, the British South African Company was given rights to administer and develop the land that they acquired through treaties with the local rulers. Now, the Livingstone Museum, located in Livingstone City, houses some very important remains of the British South African Company. They tell us some very interesting aspects of the administration system that the British South African Company had.
What we have here is just maybe just few objects that tell the story of the BSA Company. We have so much, and given the space, it was difficult to just decide what to put. But here we have the bust of John Cecil Rhodes. It was done by Redney in 1901. It must have been one of those relics that were donated to the museum when the name was changed to Rhodes Livingstone Museum. And we have several other objects. For example, if you look at this, some of the stamps here, these were revenue stamps. Once the BSA Company had established British rule, for which they were administrators, they had to find ways of raising some of the revenue. So they had to impose taxes on the local people, and also they got them involved in providing the labor force that was needed for the mines and the farms. And so some of the things you see here are those small objects that may seem very insignificant, but they tell a very big story about the BSA Company and how determined they were in terms of economic developments for their company in their view to help civilize the Africans.
I see here there's a uniform that was being worn by the messengers.
The BSA Company was given the authority to be in charge of the land and to just lease out some land and other things. They needed some kind of support from the local people in terms of running small errands. So they employed Africans to run as messengers in delivering letters, mails, and other things. So this is the uniform they designed for them, and the pictures there show how they looked in the uniform. This map shows some of the economic activities during the period of the BSA Company, and it shows two major economic activities. We could add to that a third, which I will explain. The first economic activity, which drove Cecil Rhodes to come up north, was mining. So based on that vision of trying to exploit mineral resources, several mines were established in Northern Rhodesia then. And we see there Kansanshi, Bwana Mkubwa, Broken Hill, Sable Antelope, and those were mines that were established during that time.
African labor was exploited partially by the British, imposing tax on Africans. Every able-bodied man had to pay the tax in cash. That meant that many men were forced to work as wage laborers in Zimbabwe or South Africa. Uprisings against the tax were suppressed by force. If any man defaulted, his heart was bent, and if he was caught, he was imprisoned.
These tax receipts actually were what were issued to the Africans who were able to pay the tax. And it should seem obvious that the whole idea behind was to ensure that there was accountability or just a follow-up on who had paid and who had not.
Chief among the endeavors of the British South African Company and John Cecil Rhodes was the construction of transport arteries that would link the territories that the British South African Company administered. The construction of these arteries of communication and transport were vital for the realization of John Cecil Rhodes' dream of creating a link from the Cape to Cairo. They were also vital for linking Northern Rhodesia, present-day Zambia, Southern Rhodesia, present-day Zimbabwe, and South Africa. The Victoria Falls Bridge is one of these arteries of transport that was constructed in 1905.
Initially, this bridge was constructed to join up the northern Rhodesia to the rest of the Southern Rhodesia. This was out of the dream of Cecil John Rhodes in opening up or in constructing a rail line known as the Cape to Cairo. And that is why they came to construct up this bridge as a way or as a gateway getting to Cairo. The original plan for the construction of the Cape to Cairo was not to come through this part of the country, but was to go through Salisbury and all the way up to Cairo. But because of the mighty Victoria Falls, which he had heard of, that's what actually made them to divert the plan and come through this way. And when they came here and they saw the spray, that's how now they constructed the bridge, so that the spray could fall on the coaches and the tourists and everybody else could be able to enjoy the beautiful scenarios.
The Livingston Bridge is what rapidly increased the settlement on the other side of the Zambezi River. A trade route was already established and people settled on the other side. With the construction of railway lines by the British South African Company came the introduction of locomotives such as this one. This was because they wanted to transport raw materials from the interior of present-day Zambia through present-day Zimbabwe to South Africa and eventually to Europe. This information is available at the Railway Museum located right here in Livingston City, which preserves the history of Zambia's railway system.
This train is directly linked with the BSA company because at the time when it got routed here in Zambia, the administration was using Rhodesia Railways to ferry many of the items that they needed here, like administrative issues. The workers that were coming from South Africa, Zimbabwe, to work in the BSA structures were actually brought from Zimbabwe using these trains that were crossing from there to here. This train was, however, bought by the Zambezi Sawmills, a company that was established in the early 30s to exploit timber. When the BSA came into this country, they were looking for minerals. But when they did not get minerals, firms and other people that came with the BSA company decided to have other businesses. And one of the businesses was the timber business. This coach where we're in, it was procured by Zambezi Sawmills later on for their general manager to use. The first room that we have here is a single sleeper. If you are not sleeping, it acts like a normal seat. Probably you did not see the fan, but in here you are able to see it here, just right here where we are. We have a fan here. So they realized that in Africa it could be a bit hot. And secondly, there was the luxury of a mirror. In the morning you could check your hair or check your face, and you can see they are all labeled Rhodesia Railways. So it means they are not new things. They are things that were done way back. So it was carpeted to make sure that the luxury of the people in the room is not disturbed. So this is a kind of trend that we have here.
Now, we understand that the coming of the British South African Company meant that a number of business people were traveling from South Africa, from Zimbabwe to present-day Zambia. I must say, compared to the cultures that we have in present day, this is a beautiful coach. More than 110 years old, but the furniture is just so beautiful and the wood is of high quality. It's amazing. Strategically planned, the railway construction by the British South Africa Company was not expected to produce return on investment in its early years of operation. However, during the following years, the railway line proved to be a worthwhile investment as the only dependable route to transport mineral wealth and other raw materials worth millions of pounds. I am now at what used to be known as Broken Hill Mine in Kabwe, then known as Broken Hill. One of the first mines to be fully operational under the British South African Company was discovered here in 1902. When lead and zinc deposits were discovered, the mine was founded, and by 1906, it was fully operational and one of the biggest mines operating in the then Northern Rhodesia. Mr. Njovu, what are we seeing in the background?
Yeah, this is the former ZTCM Kawe mine ore shaft, which used to be used for the production of ore and for men going in. Since the mine was closed in 1994, ZTCM sealed the mine. Now the mine has now been left as a national heritage site.
After 1897, the British South Africa Company administration encouraged the immigration of white settlers with exaggerated tales of mineral deposits. The company over the years failed to make the projected profits. Loss of this source of income hampered the company's ability to pay dividends to its shareholders and caused its development of Rhodesia to slow. When these claims were proved to be overstated, settlers were encouraged to become farmers. The company retained its commercial assets. However, its mineral rights in Northern Rhodesia became a valuable source of revenue following the development of copper mining industry in the territory.
The relationship between the BSA company and the birth of colonial rule is that the BSA company, as I've indicated, coming as a business entity, given a charter with which to administer. Now that administration itself was the bedrock, what one would call as the foundation of colonial rule in this country, because the BSA company, therefore, was administered in this country not for itself, but on behalf of a colonial power. That colonial power, in our case, or in the case of this country, was the British government.
The end of the British South Africa Company rule came in 1923 when the white settlers were granted a responsible government. In 1924, the British Colonial Office took control of present-day Zambia. Now, Kalumba, I know our story of the history of the British South African Company is getting more interesting, but I would like to remind our viewers that Zamtel will continue taking us back into the history of our country as we celebrate 50 years of independence on this series. Next week, we shall trace the history of colonial rule in present-day Zambia. It's back to you, Kalumba, to let us in on what else Zamtel has in store for us.
You're still watching Today with Zamtel, and that was some really exciting information from Patience Chisanga. I'm actually looking forward to next week's episode as well, when we take a look at the British colonial rule in Northern Rhodesia, which is present-day Zambia. So that's going to be another insightful edition of your favorite family show, Today with Zamtel.
Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the App Incubator segment of the show. So what are we doing this week to get our teeth further into this exciting project?
This week we're looking at building an Android project, meaning setting up the actual Android project. So our Android project that we're setting up is the Android project for the TravelMate app.
Okay, and the TravelMate app, viewers, is our example. This is what we're going to develop here at Zamtel in order to give you some insight into how we go about developing a mobile app.
I shall hand you over to Henry, who will take us through step by step on how to set up an Android project.
Thank you very much, Milimo. Good evening, viewers. From the Eclipse main menu, we click New Android Project. From there, we have the application name, project name, package name. Our application name is the TravelMate app, and it should begin with the capital letter, no space. TravelMate met app, and then on the package name, which is the project name spacing, which is in Java, not very different from Java. Where there's com, we just replace with Zam. And then minimum required SDK we're working with is Android 4.2 Jelly Bean, and then the target SDK is Android 4.2 Jelly Bean, and we're going to compare with the same Android 4.2 Jelly Bean. Next, and then on the new Android application configure project, you just untick on create custom launcher icon, and tick also on the create activity, and then just go direct to finish. Then you wait for it to build and process, and it's done. And there we have our app.
And to talk about the components, I'll hand it over to Gilbert.
Starting from where Henry left off, where we created the Android project, the first thing we're going to look at, which is the most important, is the Android manifest. The Android manifest file is what holds all the information that we're going to be used in the application in terms of configuration. Now, the first node you're going to notice in the manifest file is the root node that has information here that you may not need, but you have to reference either way. We also have the package name that we defined in the beginning, the version code and the version name. We're also stating that we're going to be using the Android SDK, and the minimum SDK version we're going to use is 4.2.2 Jelly Bean, which is API level 17, including the target. Now, the most operational node is the application node, where we're going to be storing information about the actual application that we're building. For example, we'll have the activities and all that nice information within here. Now, we've seen we've got reference to drawable, string, and style, which stay here in the resources folder. The resources folder is where we keep all resources that we're going to use in the application. For example, in the drawables is where we keep the ping image. There are all types of images that we're going to use that start from high resolution for like the S4 to the lowest resolution, for example in Alcatel. Now we also have the values. The values is where we store strings and all other information that we need to reference throughout the entire application. In case you want to use the app name in multiple places, you just reference the strings and say at app name. We also have the style, which is going to work the same for each and every activity that's going to be produced. Now, down into the core functionality, we've got the sources folder here where we store all Java files. If we want activities, implementation, array adapters and all that, we define all our files here in the sources folder. This is where the compilation is going to mostly happen. We also have auto-generated files by the IDE for us. For example here, the resources.java. You notice the drawables, there's the IC launcher, we have the app name. They are given address blocks in here in terms of integers so that the application can reference it properly. And having said that, that's all we need in the setup of the actual project. The next basic information we're going to have is what we're going to look at next week on production of the home screen. That's about it for now. The rest of the information will be adding on as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Milimo. That was very exciting. Now, for those of our viewers who might find it rather difficult to digest all that information at one go, how can they go about getting such help?
Right. You can visit our Zamtel website, and that is www.zamtel.zm. All you simply need to do is to click on the App Incubator link, and you'll find the tutorials there. In addition to that, we have the videos that we've put up on YouTube, and those will give you more detailed information on how we set up and develop an Android application. You can also follow us on Facebook as well as Twitter.
Now, what are we going to be doing next week?
We shall look at implementation of the home screen. That is looking at the actual Android layout and the coding of the home screen.
Well, viewers, thank you very much for joining us on the App Incubator segment of the show, and we very much look forward to hosting you on this segment again next week. Thank you very much, and good night.
I guess it's been a lovely episode of Today with Zamtel in the special series, The Road to Independence, with my colleague Patience Chisanga. Don't forget to join us next week at the same time. Remember, you can find us on Facebook and like the page Official Zamtel. You can also follow us on Twitter and be part of the app's development process. On behalf of our producer, Kennedy Mambwe, and indeed the entire production crew, I am Kalumba Chikonde. Remember to keep it green with Zamtel. Bye-bye.